Picture this. You wake to the sound of reed mats crunching under sandaled feet in Tenochtitlan. As shadowed temples where promises of divine glory lure chosen young men only to haunt their dreams as hoe. Low-eyed spectres, their souls eternally chained to altars of unspeakable horrors. The sun hung low over the great city of Tenochtitlan, casting long shadows across the bustling marketplaces where merchants hawked feathers of quetzal birds and obsidian blades sharp enough to slice teeth. Rough fate itself, Tlalli, a young man of 19 summers, moved through the crowds with the quiet grace that had always set him apart. His skin was the color of burnished copper, his eyes dark pools reflecting the world with a depth that unnerved even his closest kin. Born to a family of humble weavers near the canals Tlalli had grown up weaving threads into vibrant cloaks, his fingers nimble and his mind filled with stories of the gods Huitzilopochtli the Sun Warrior and Quetzalcoatl the Feathered Serpent who demanded devotion in ways both beautiful and terrifying. But on this day, the air felt heavier, thick with the scent of copal incense drifting from the distant pyramids. Tlalli paused at the edge of the market, his heart quickening as he noticed the priests approaching. They were clad in black robes adorned with jade beads, their faces painted with stark white lines that mimicked skulls. The lead priest, an elder named Ixtli with eyes like polished onyx, stopped before him. "The gods have spoken," Ixtli intoned, his voice a low rumble that seemed to echo from the earth itself. "You bear the mark of the Xochihuas, the Flower One. The Emperor's court requires your service as a concubine to honor the divine balance." Tlalli's breath caught in his throat. He had heard whispers of the xochihuas, men who embodied the sacred duality, serving nobility not just in body, but in spirit, bridging the worlds of male and female, warrior and nurturer. It was said to be a path of elevation, lifting families from poverty to favor. Yet, as the priests led him away, Tlalli felt a chill seep into his bones. Despite the midday heat, the crowds parted silently. Their eyes averted not in respect, he realized, but in pity. His mother, standing at the doorway of their modest home, clutched a woven shawl to her chest, her face etched with unspoken dread. "Return to us," she murmured. But her words were swallowed by the wind. The journey to the palace was a blur of stone pathways and echoing chants. Tlalli's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Pride swelled in him this selection could bring honor to his lineage, perhaps even gifts from the Emperor Montezuma himself. But doubt gnawed at the edges. Why him? He had no warrior's build, no priestly calling. Only a quiet beauty that others remarked upon with hushed tones. As they entered the palace gates, the air grew cooler, laden with the musty scent of ancient stone and blooming night flowers. Servants bathed him in scented waters, their hands gentle yet impersonal, as if preparing an offering rather than a man. That night, in a chamber lit by flickering torches, Tlalli lay on a mat of woven reeds, the silence broken only by distant drums. He tried to sleep, but visions intruded, shadows twisting on the walls like serpents, whispering names he couldn't quite hear. When morning came, Ixtli returned, bearing garments of fine cotton embroidered with floral motifs, attire more suited to noble women than men. "You must embrace the flower within," the priest said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Tlalli donned the clothes, feeling a strange vulnerability, as if his very identity was being unraveled thread by thread. As the day wore on, the initial honor began to sour. In the palace halls, other young men like him moved with downcast eyes, their movements graceful but mechanical. A boy named Coyotl with hollow cheeks brushed past Tlalli and whispered, "The gods' embrace is cold flay if you can." Before Tlalli could respond, Coyotl was gone, vanishing into the shadows. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in blood-red hues, Tlalli felt the first true stir of fear. The palace, once a symbol of glory, now seemed a labyrinth of secrets, its walls closing in like the jaws of a jaguar. He wondered if this was truly elevation or the beginning of a descent into something far darker. The palace's inner sanctum was a world apart from the vibrant chaos of Tenochtitlan streets. Tlalli was led through corridors lined with murals depicting gods in eternal dancemen and women intertwined, and in rituals that blurred the lines of flesh and spirit. The air here was perpetually scented with marigold petals and burning herbs, a cloying sweetness that masked an underlying bitterness, like decay hidden beneath beauty. Ixtli and his attendants began the purification, a series of rites designed, they claimed, to awaken the xochihuas' sacred essence. Tlalli's days blurred into a rhythm of instruction. Mornings brought lessons in movement, how to walk with the sway of a reed in the wind, how to gesture with hands that evoked blooming flowers rather than clenched fists, his instructors. Elder xochihuas with painted faces and vacant stares corrected him gently but firmly. "You are no longer just man," one murmured, his voice a hollow echo. "You are the bridge, the offering." Tlalli felt a rift opening within him. Part of him rebelled against this softening yearning for the rough camaraderie of his brothers in the fields, while another part seduced by the luxury of silken fabrics and jeweled adornments whispered of power. Nights were worse. Confined to a small chamber overlooking the temple pyramids, Tlalli would lie awake, the cool night breeze carrying faint cries from the distance, perhaps the wind, or perhaps something more human. He dreamed of his family, his mother's weary smile, his father's stories of ancient heroes, but in these dreams, their faces twisted into masks of accusation, as if he had abandoned them willingly. Waking in sweat, he would touch the embroidered robes draped over him, feeling like a stranger in his own skin. As the transformation deepened, subtle disturbances emerged. During a ritual bath infused with sacred herbs, Tlalli felt his reflection in the water ripple unnaturally, his features softening into something ethereal, almost feminine. "The gods reshape you," Ixtli explained. But Tlalli sensed a lie in the priest's steady gaze. The food they provided, maize cakes laced with pulque and unknown powders, left him light-headed. His thoughts fragmenting like scattered petals, he began to hear whispers in the silence, soft voices calling his name, urging him deeper into the role. One afternoon, in the palace gardens where exotic birds sang mournful tunes, Tlalli encountered Xochitl again. The boy, now adorned in full xochihuas regalia, pulled him behind a flowering bush. "They choose us for our beauty," Xochitl hissed, his eyes wide with terror. "But it's not for pleasure, it's for the altars. The Emperor's concubines feed the gods hunger in ways blood alone cannot." Tlalli recoiled, his heart pounding like war drums. Xochitl's words planted a seed of dread. But when Tlalli sought him later, the boy had vanished, leaving only a discarded feather on the ground. Internal conflict raged within Tlalli. He wanted to believe this was destiny, a chance to transcend his humble origins, yet Xochitl's warning echoed like a curse that night, as torches flickered and shadows danced on the walls. Tlalli felt an invisible presence watching him, a cold breath on his neck, a subtle pressure urging submission. He called into himself, the chamber's isolation amplifying every creak of stone, every distant chant. The transformation was no longer just physical. It was invading his soul, pulling him toward an abyss where his true self might drown forever. Weeks stretched into an agonizing eternity within the palace's unyielding walls, where the relentless hum of distant rituals warped time itself into a cruel illusion. Tlalli's once vibrant world had contracted to the suffocating confines of the temple annex, a twisting labyrinth of chambers hewn from jagged volcanic stone that remained perpetually cool to the touch, as if the rock harbored the chill of the underworld. Dampness clung to everything, seeping from invisible fissures like the slow bleed of an ancient wound, leaving beads of moisture that traced eerie patterns down the walls. The air thickened with the sharp, acrid bite of copal resin smouldering in braziers forged into the snarling maws of jaguars, their bronze eyes glinting malevolently in the dim torchlight. Every sound reverberated unnaturally through the space, the incessant drip of water from hidden sources, echoing like the tears of condemned souls. The erratic flutter of bats nesting in the shadowed rafters, their wings slicing the silence like invisible blades, and beneath it all, the low, guttural chants of priests invoking the names of gods Huitzilopochtli's war cry, Tezcatlipoca's deceptive murmur that sent involuntary shivers racing along Tlalli's spine, as if the deities themselves were breathing down his neck. Isolation had become Tlalli's most insidious tormentor, a silent spectre that wrapped round him tighter with each passing day. The priests had separated him from the other xochihuas under the guise of deepening communion with the divine. But Tlalli sensed the lie in their evasive gazes, a calculated ploy to strip away his last anchors to humanity. Meals appeared sporadically through a narrow slot in the heavy wooden door, meager portions of a toll porridge thickened with maize and sweetened fruits from the palace gardens. But each spoonful carried a lingering metallic tang that coated his tongue like rust fogging his thoughts and dulling his senses. Was it poison, or merely a sedative to bend his will? He paced the chamber endlessly, the soft whisper of his embroidered garments brushing against the uneven floor like secretive conspirators plotting his downfall. One wall was lined with mirrors of polished obsidian, their surfaces as black and unyielding as the night sky, forcing him to confront the stranger staring back, eyes rimmed with dark kohl that accentuated their haunted depth, hair slicked with fragrant oils and braided with iridescent feathers that caught the light like mocking jewels, his form now a blurred amalgamation that erased the boundaries of manhood he once knew. "Am I still Tlalli?" he whispered aloud, his voice fracturing and echoing back distorted, as if the stones themselves were mocking his fragility, twisting his words into a chorus of derision that amplified his growing despair. Deep within, Tlalli's psyche fractured under the weight of conflicting storms. On one side raged a lingering pride, the boy from the weaver's hut elevated to divine service, a bridge between worlds that could immortalize his name in the annals of the Empire. Yet, opposing it was a swelling tide of terror, a visceral rejection of this forced metamorphosis that screamed of violation, not veneration. He clung desperately to fragments of his former life, the rough warmth of his mother's embrace, the rhythmic clack of his father's loom under starlit skies, the laughter of siblings chasing fireflies along the canals. But these memories, once vivid lifelines, now unraveled like frayed threads in his mind, leaving him adrift in a sea of self-doubt. Was this honor a cruel deception, a punishment for some ancestral sin he could not recall? The isolation fed these inner demons, turning every quiet moment into a battlefield where hope clashed futilely against an encroaching doom. A tragic inevitability that whispered of a fate sealed long before his selection. The whispers emerged subtly at first, masquerading as the wind sighing through hairline cracks in the stone, a deceptive caress that lulled before it struck. But soon they coalesced into discernible words, fragments of ancient Nahuatl, archaic and insistent, urging unquestioning obedience while promising an ecstasy born of total surrender. "Yield to the flower eternal," they murmured, their timber-like silk over sharpened obsidian. Tlalli clamped his hands over his ears, palms slick with cold sweat, but the voices permeated regardless, insidious tendrils planting seeds of paranoia. Had his family truly forgotten him, erasing his name from their prayers as if he had never existed? Was this gilded cage not elevation, but retribution for a sin buried in his bloodline? The turmoil deepened, his heart a tumultuous storm where faith in the gods warred with a primal urge to rebel. each whisper carving deeper grooves into his fracturing resolve. One fateful evening, as twilight bled into an impenetrable night, painting the chamber in hues of bruised purple, the slot in the door creaked open with ominous finality. A masked attendant, face obscured by a feathered headdress that resembled a vulture's beak, slid in a chalice brimming with a foaming liquid that glowed faintly in the gloom. "Drink further visions of truth," the voice commanded, hollow and devoid of humanity, like an echo from the realm of the dead. Tlalli hesitated, the bruised bitter scent assaulting his nostrils, evoking the rot of overripe flowers decaying in forgotten graves, a nauseating reminder of mortality. Yet, compelled by an unseen force that tugged at his very soul, as if invisible strings manipulated his limbs, he lifted the chalice and sipped. The world tilted violently, colors bleeding into one another as hallucinations slithered from the shadows, amorphous forms coalescing into spectral figures of past xochihuas. Their faces pallid masks of eternal anguish, eyes sunken pits pleading for release. One apparition extended a translucent hand, its cold fingers brushing Tlalli's arm with the chill of a grave's embrace, whispering hoarsely, "The gods consume from within," devouring the essence until nothing remains but hollow shells. Tlalli recoiled in primal terror, the chamber spinning in a vortex of disorientation, his heart thundering like the war drums of an approaching apocalypse. Each beat etching the image of those pleading ghosts into his mind, an indelible scar of what awaited. Desperation surged through him like a flood, driving Tlalli to claw at the unyielding walls, his nails scraping futilely against the stone until they splintered and bled, crimson trails marking his futile rebellion like sacrificial offerings. The isolation magnified every torment, the insidious chill seeping into his bones like the grasp of Meticulous underworld, the oppressive silence shattered only by his own ragged, gasping breaths that echoed his accusations of weakness. In that moment of clarity amid the chaos, he grasped the true horror, not merely the physical transformation, but the systematic erasure of his self, fragment by fragment, until only a vessel remained for the gods' insatiable hunger. As the visions ebbed away, leaving him collapsed and trembling on the cold floor, Tlalli felt the inexorable pull of his tragic destiny closing in, an inescapable shroud where the temple's encroaching shadows devoured the final flickers of light, sealing him in a darkness from which no dawn could emerge. The visions escalated with merciless intensity, eroding the fragile boundary between wakefulness and the abyss of nightmares within Tlalli's unforgiving stone prison. The chamber's walls appeared to inhale and exhale in labored breaths, their rough surfaces pulsing in sinister synchrony with his accelerating heartbeat, as if the very architecture had awakened to mirror his inner chaos. The once familiar scent of incense had swollen into an overpowering miasmatic and cloying like the breath of a dying beast interwoven with her insidious undercurrent of damp earth, and festering decay, a primordial aroma that suggested the ground beneath the palace yearned to swallow him whole, reclaiming his flesh for the underworld's insatiable maw. Days dissolved into irrelevance, their passage marked only by the meager light filtering through narrow slits in the stone, casting elongated shadows that rift and contorted into grotesque apparitions, serpents coiling in eternal agony, eagles with piercing human eyes that stared accusingly, imprinting themselves as eternal sentinels in the recesses of his fracturing mind. Tlalli's psyche splintered under this relentless onslaught, each crack revealing deeper layers of vulnerability and torment. The hallucinogenic brews, delivered nightly through the door slot like ritual offerings from indifferent gods, acted as keys unlocking forbidden doors to realms he instinctively recoiled from exploring. In one such harrowing vision, he found himself adrift in endless fields of maize under a blood-moon sky, the stalks towering like accusatory fingers, whispering insidious secrets of forgotten sacrifices, tales of youths like him, their essences drained to nourish the soil, the leaves brushed against his skin with the ethereal touch of spectral hands, cold, and insistent, leaving trails of gooseflesh that burned long after the hallucination faded, a tactile memory that haunted his waking hours. He beheld himself multiplied infinitely across the landscape, each doppelganger more ethereal and shattered than the last, one version weeping silently, another clawing at its own face in madness, until the distinctions blurred, and he could no longer discern which iteration was the real Tlalli, during a rare, intrusive visit from Ixtli. The priest's words echoed mockingly in his skull. "This is the god's gift, a path to transcendence." But the elder's eyes betrayed a conflicting gleam. Was it genuine pity for the doomed youth, or the sadistic satisfaction of an architect witnessing his creations unraveling? That ambiguity lodged in Tlalli's thoughts like a barb thorn, festering and amplifying his dread internally. Tlalli was a battlefield of warring impulses, his soul torn asunder by profound conflicts that deepened his tragic inevitability. On one hand, he ached with raw yearning for the unadorned simplicity of his former existence, the sun-warmed canals where he once skipped stones with carefree abandon, the comforting rhythm of his family's loom echoing through humble nights, a life grounded in tangible joys rather than ethereal curses. Yet, insidious as a creeping vine, a dark fascination took root within him, the seductive power inherent in submission, the intoxicating allure of metamorphosing into something divine, a vessel of cosmic significance that could eclipse his mortal insignificance. But doubt gnawed relentlessly at these illusions, a corrosive acid questioning the vision's authenticity. Were they revelations from the gods, or meticulously engineered madness orchestrated by the priests to break his spirit? In desperate bids for a grounding, he raked his nails across his arms, seeking the sharp sting of pain to reaffirm his corporeal existence. But the marks faded with unnatural swiftness, vanishing like mist under dawn's light, as if his body had betrayed him, no longer truly his own, but a puppet strung by invisible divine threads. This realization etched itself as a visceral imprint, the horror of autonomy slipping away, leaving only a hollow shell destined for obliteration. A night of unparalleled harrowing descent plunged him deeper into the void, summoning a vision of the temple's pulsating heart, an altar slick with unseen offerings that gleamed wetly under flickering torchlight, encircled by ghostly xochihuas, whose forms flickered like dying embers. Their eyes were vacant orbs, bottomless voids reflecting infinite suffering, and one figure pivoted toward him with agonizing slowness. Kyotl, his once familiar face now contorted in an eternal, silent scream, lips mouthing the damning words, "They harvest our essences, feeding the gods with our stolen souls." The apparition's gaze bored into Tlalli's core, a piercing accusation that branded his consciousness, awakening him with a gasp that tore from his throat like a death rattle. The chamber's cold floor pressed against his back like the lid of a grave, unyielding and eternal, while the whispers that had once merely urged now erupted into mocking laughter, a dissonant cacophony that drowned his frantic thoughts, swirling round him like a vortex of deranged spirits. As this tormentous interlude reached its zenith, Tlalli staggered to confront one of the obsidian mirrors, his reflection splintering into jagged shards of refracted light that danced mockingly, each fragment capturing a different facet of his unraveling self, one eye wide with terror, another narrowed in futile defiance. With a surge of raw anguish, he smashed his fist into the glass, the shards exploding outward and slicing into his palms, crimson blood welling up in rivulets that dripped onto the floor like sacrificial libations. The pain, sharp and immediate, cut through the haze like a lightning bolt, granting a fleeting clarity amid the madness. This was no exalted honor bestowed by benevolent deities, but a meticulously cruel preparation for a total obliteration, a stripping away of his essence until nothing remained but echoes. The doom settled over him with palpable weight pressing down like the hand of an indifferent fate, as the shadows in the chamber gathered with purposeful menace, coalescing into forms that promised horrors yet unfathomed, sealing his tragic path toward an inescapable end where Resistance only hastened the inevitable descent. With each successive ritual, the veneer of Tlalli's enforced isolation began to fracture like brittle obsidian under mounting pressure, granting him fleeting, forbidden glimpses into the palace's shadowy underbelly, a realm of concealed atrocities that whispered of deeper depravities. The air within his chamber had transformed into a stagnant miasma, thick and oppressive, laced with the unmistakable metallic tang of blood drifting from distant altars, seeping insidiously through the porous stones like silent accusations from the sacrificed, each droplet a reminder of lives extinguished to appease insatiable deities. Tlalli had mastered the art of feigned compliance, gliding through his daily ablutions with the prescribed ethereal grace, his hands tracing ritual patterns over his adorned body, his steps measured and swaying like reeds in a sacred wine. But beneath this facade, a simmering rebellion ignited, a defiant fire flickering against the encroaching void that threatened to engulf his very essence. This duality tore at him relentlessly, the weaver as son who once found solace in simple threads, now grappled with a psyche divided, where submission promised divine elevation, yet every forced gesture fueled an inner blaze of resistance, a tragic harbinger of his doomed struggle against a fate woven by gods indifferent to mortal pleas. Psychological depths churned within Tlalli like turbulent waters beneath a calm lake surface, his mind a labyrinth of conflicting loyalties and burgeoning horrors. He pondered the boy he had been, innocent, grounded in the tangible world of family and craft, now supplanted by this hybrid figure, a xochihua whose beauty masked an impending erasure. Faith in the gods, instilled since childhood through tales of cosmic balance, clashed violently with a primal survival instinct that screamed for escape, each internal skirmish etching deeper scars into his soul. The inevitability of his tragic destiny loomed ever larger, a shadowy spectre that whispered of predetermined ruin, where choice was illusion and surrender the only path, sealing him in a cycle of eternal lament. One fateful dawn, as the first hesitant rays pierced the gloom like hesitant witnesses to unfolding doom, Ixtli materialized unannounced at the chamber's threshold, his black robe marred by streaks of what appeared to be perhaps remnants of nocturnal offerings, grey smudges that evoked the charred remains of devoured spirits. His eyes, usually inscrutable pools of onyx, flickered with an urgency that sent a chill cascading down Tlalli's spine. "The time nears for your ascension," Ixtli intoned, his voice a gravelly echo resonating like a pronouncement from the underworld, before grasping Tlalli's arm with fingers cold as grave soil and leading him into the labyrinthine hidden passages that burrowed deeper into the palace's heart. The corridors twisted like serpents in agony, their walls slick with condensation that dripped in rhythmic patterns, each drop a haunting metronome counting down to revelation. Torches mounted in iron brackets sputtered with unnatural greenish flames, casting eerie wavering glows that distorted shadows into leering faces, elongated jaws, and hollow eyes that seemed to follow Tlalli's every step, imprinting themselves as spectral guardians of forbidden knowledge. As they descended, sounds emerged from the depths, muffled sobs that echoed like the wept confessions of the damned, intermingled with rhythmic drumming that vibrated through Tlalli's chest like the heartbeat of a colossal, awakening beast, each thrum amplifying his mounting dread and carving the auditory assault into his memory as an unrelenting pulse of impending catastrophe. They emerged into a vast subterranean hall, a cavernous expanse where the air hung heavy with the mingled scents of sweat, incense, and something primal fear distilled into vapor. Here rows of other xochihuas knelt in reverent prostration before an imposing statue of Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror god, his obsidian form looming with arms outstretched in judgmental embrace. Wisps of illusory smoke curling from his carved nostrils as if he breathed judgment upon the assembled. Their bodies were adorned in swirling patterns of ritual pink, crimson, and black motifs that appeared to shift and undulate on their skin like living tattoos. evoking serpents shedding old forms or souls writhing in eternal flux. A visual symphony of transformation that burned into Tlalli's gaze as a mesmerizing yet terrifying tableau of collective subjugation. In this charged atmosphere, the truth unraveled like a frayed tapestry pulled taut until it tore asunder. Amid the momentary surge of chaos chants rising to a fevered pitch, bodies swaying in hypnotic unison, an elder xochihua, his frame withered and trembling like a leaf, clinging to a dying branch, seized Tlalli's sleeve and drew him into a shadowed alcove. The old man's breath was hot and foul, reeking of decay and unspoken regrets, as he rasped in a voice cracked by years of silent stagny, "We are not concubines, boy, not lovers to the mighty, but vessels hollowed out for divine greed. The gods demand our spirits, stripped bare and fed into the maw of creation to sustain the world's fragile balance. It is sacrifice not of the body, but of the soul, eternal torment in their shadowy realms, where consciousness lingers without end." The words struck Tlalli like a sacrificial blade, shattering his fragile illusions. The psychological weight descended upon him like a collapsing pyramid, crushing his spirit under layers of betrayal and horror. He recalled Coyotl's cryptic warning, once dismissed as paranoia, now blooming into a dire prophecy that rooted itself in his core, an indelible thorn of foresight. Conflict raged anew within him, the ingrained belief in the gods' benevolence, a pillar of his upbringing, warred ferociously with a surging survival instinct that howled for rebellion, each clash intensifying the tragic certainty that his path led inexorably to annihilation, a fate scripted in the stars long before his birth. That night, returned to his chamber's suffocating solitude, the visions assaulted him with renewed ferocity, unbidden apparitions that clawed at the edges of his sanity. He envisioned his family mother, father, siblings gathered round a makeshift altar, their faces twisted into masks of blind devotion as they offered him willingly to the flames, their eyes gleaming with fanatic zeal that masked underlying sorrow, an image that seared itself into his mind as a betrayal etched in firelight. Dread coiled in his gut like a venomous serpent awakening, twisting tighter with each breath, while the chamber's profound silence amplified into a deafening scream, a void that echoed his unspoken terror. In this moment of stark clarity, Tlalli grasped the full inevitability of his plight. The chosen ones never returned, their essences siphoned to fuel the gods' ravenous hunger, leaving behind only echoes of what once was human. As the shadows in the room lengthened, creeping like fingers of the night god himself, Tlalli felt his will eroding particle by particle, the horror of eternal entrapment looming like an inescapable eclipse, blotting out all light and hope, condemning him to a destiny where escape was but a cruel mirage in the desert of divine whim. A fragile spark of defiance ignited in the fractured depths of Tlalli's mind, a tremulous flame flickering defiantly against the temple's oppressive gloom, where shadows clung to the walls like specters of despair. The chamber that had once confined him like a tomb now revealed subtle vulnerabilities, hairline cracks in the volcanic stone where faint slivers of light pierced through, glinting like whispered promises of possibility. The air, once saturated only with the heavy incense of copal, now carried a fleeting, tantalizing whiff of lake air from beyond the palace, its crisp, watery scent evoking memories of Tenochtitlan's canals, where Tlalli once waded as a boy, free under open skies. This sensory intrusion stirred a longing so visceral it burned, anchoring him to the life he was being stripped from, piece by piece. In secret, he began hoarding scraps of rebellion, a sharp obsidian shard, splintered from a broken ritual vessel, now concealed within the folds of his embroidered robes. Its cold edge a silent vow against surrender. Each touch of the shard against his skin was a tactile reminder of resistance, a defiant pulse against the encroaching void that threatened to erase him entirely, its jagged surface imprinting itself as both weapon and wound in his psyche. Tlalli's nights transformed into fevered vigils of planning. His thoughts a whirlwind of desperate schemes to reclaim his stolen self. Yet, the whispers that plagued him, those insidious voices woven from ancient Nahuatl, grew bolder, slithering into his mind like serpents through the cracks in his resolve. "You are ours already," they taunted, their mocking cadence intertwining with his doubts, sowing seeds of futility that bloomed in the darkness. Internal strife reached a crescendo, the psychological tempest tearing at the core of his being. On one side stood the weight of divine duty, instilled from childhood tales of gods who demanded absolute devotion, promising cosmic harmony through sacrifice. On the other, a primal instinct for self-preservation screamed, urging him to claw his way back to the mortal world, to the weaver's son who once laughed under starlit skies. He questioned his sanity with every heartbeat. Were these plans of escape born of courage, or the delusions of a mind broken by hallucinogenic brews and relentless isolation? The conflict carved deeper grooves into his soul, each moment of doubt a haunting echo of his tragic, inescapable fate. A destiny that seemed to tighten round him like a noose woven by the gods themselves. During a rare group ritual, where xochihuas gathered in a cavernous hole beneath the flickering glow of braziers, Tlalli seized a fleeting opportunity, as priests chanted in hypnotic unison, their voices rising like a tide to drown out individual thought. He slipped away, heart pounding like war drums echoing through his chest. He navigated the shadowy halls, their walls slick with condensation that glistened like tears of the damned, each step echoing with the distant chants that seemed to pursue him. A relentless reminder of his captivity, guided by instinct. He found a barred window overlooking the sprawling city of Tenochtitlan, its torchlit canals shimmering like veins of liquid fire under the night sky. The stars above, cold and indifferent, marked his confinement with their unreachable freedom, their light a cruel mirror to the obsidian shard clutched in his trembling hand. The sight of the city so close, yet impossibly distant, etched itself into his mind as a tableau of lost hope, a vision of a world he might never touch again, amplifying the tragic weight of his doomed rebellion. Confrontation came swiftly, as inevitable as the rising sun. Ixtli, with his piercing onyx eyes, intercepted Tlalli in a narrow passage, his robe trailing ash like remnants of burned offerings. A visual accusation that seared into Tlalli's memory. Resistance feeds the gods' delight. The priest hissed, his voice a venomous blend of warning and triumph, as if Tlalli's defiance were merely another offering to be savored by divine appetites. Before Tlalli could react, Ixtli forced a bitter draught past his lips, its acrid taste like rotting earth, sending tendrils of paralysis snaking through his limbs. Tlalli collapsed, immobile, his body a prisoner while his mind raced through a gallery of horrors, visions of predecessors trapped in a liminal limbo, their souls screaming silently in eternal torment, their faces contorted in expressions of anguish that burned into his consciousness like brands. As the paralysis ebbed, leaving him gasping on the cold stone floor, Tlalli vowed escape with renewed fervor, clutching the obsidian shard until his palm bled, the pain a defiant anchor to his fading humanity. Yet the whispers returned, soft and insidious, murmuring that every step toward freedom only hastened his path to the altar, a chilling prophecy that wrapped round his heart like a shroud. The part's climax arrived with a gut-wrenching sea that would haunt any witness, as Tlalli hid in the shadows, clutching his shard like a talisman. He overheard the cries of another xochihua, perhaps Coyotl, perhaps another lost soul dragged away by stone-faced gods through the echoing corridors. The boy's screams, raw and desperate, faded into a suffocating silence, each diminishing note a hammer struck against Tlalli's resolve, imprinting the sound as a visceral reminder of the fate awaiting him. The noose of his destiny tightened, a palpable constriction that squeezed the air from his lungs. Alone in the darkness, Tlalli gripped the obsidian shard, its cold and yielding edge drawing a thin trickle of blood that pooled in his palm, a crimson testament to his futile rebellion. The sensation of the shard's bite coupled with the fading echoes of the other's cries crystallized into an indelible image of defiance doomed to fail, a solitary figure clutching a fragment of hope against the crushing inevitability of a fate scripted by merciless gods each moment, pulling him closer to the altar's unyielding embrace. The climax descended upon Tlalli like a tempest rolling over Lake Texcoco, the air crackling with an electric charge of impending doom that seemed to pulse through the very stones of Tenochtitlan. Summoned in the dead of night, Tlalli was led from his suffocating chamber to the base of the Great Pyramid, its towering silhouette a jagged wound against the sky. The drums thundered relentlessly, their rhythm mimicking the primal heartbeat of the earth itself, each beat reverberating through Tlalli's chest like a summons from the underworld. The night was oppressively starless, smothered by clouds swollen with unstrain, their weight pressing down as if the heavens themselves mourned his fate. The air carried a perverse bouquet, a sickening fusion of fresh blood, its coppery tang sharp and visceral, mingling with the cloying sweetness of marigold and copal offerings, a sensory assault that twisted in his gut like a blade. The scent etched itself into his memory, a haunting prelude to the horrors awaiting at the pyramid summit, where the god's hunger loomed as an inescapable spectre as Tlalli ascended the steep, slick steps of the pyramid, each one cold and treacherous beneath his trembling feet. His legs quaked with a weakness born of both physical exhaustion and soul-deep dread. Priests flanked him on either side, their black robes swaying like shadows given form, their chants weaving a hypnotic dirge that seemed to bind his limbs with invisible cords. The words, ancient and guttural, invoked Huitzilopochtli, the sun god whose thirst for sacrifice sustained the world's fragile balance, each syllable tightening the noose of Tlalli's tragic destiny. The higher he climbed, the more the world below receded, Tenochtitlan's torch-lit canals fading into a distant dream, replaced by the oppressive reality of the temple's apex. At the summit, the altar loomed a massive stone slab, its surface etched with divine symbols that seemed to writhe under the flickering light, as if animated by the gods' own malice. Braziers encircled it, their blue flames flaring unnaturally, casting ghostly hues across the scene and painting the priests' faces with an otherworldly pallor. Ixtli stood at the altar's edge, his face obscured by a mask of eagle feathers that quivered in the wind, transforming him into a harbinger of divine judgment. "Your essence will nourish Huitzilopochtli," he intoned, his voice a low rumble that seemed to rise from the earth itself, resonating with a finality that pierced Tlalli's heart like a sacrificial dagger, imprinting the moment as an indelible tableau of inevitable doom. Tlalli's mind erupted in a maelstrom of turmoil, a psychological battlefield where fragmented memories of his life clashed with the inexorable pull of the god's will. Flashes assaulted him, his mother's weathered hands weaving vibrant threads, the laughter of siblings by the canal, the warmth of a life now reduced to ash in his memory. These fleeting glimpses of humanity warred against the crushing weight of divine expectation, the seductive yet terrifying call to surrender his soul to become a vessel for cosmic balance. A deeper conflict raged within part of him, broken by months of manipulation. He yearned to embrace the role of xochihua, to dissolve into the divine, and escape the pain of mortal struggle. Yet another part, raw and defiant, ached to cling to his humanity, to the boy who once dreamed of a life unbound by altars. Visions swarmed his mind, unbidden and merciless, spectral xochihuas, their souls bound in ethereal chains, swirling in a vortex of silent pleas that formed a cacophony in his head, their hollow eyes accusing him of joining their ranks. One figure, perhaps Kayotl, reached out with translucent fingers, its touch cold as the void, whispering, "You cannot flee the altar's embrace," the image seared into Tlalli's consciousness. a haunting imprint of eternal entrapment that fueled his mounting dread, amplifying the tragic certainty that his path led only to annihilation. In a desperate surge of defiance, Tlalli's hand tightened round the obsidian shard hidden in his robes, its jagged edge biting into his palm, a final tether to his fading agency. With a cry that tore from his throat like a wounded animal's, he lunged toward Ixtli, the shard glinting with malicious intent under the blue flames. But the priests were swift, their hands like iron clamps seizing his wrists, pinning him with a strength that spoke of countless such rebellions crushed before his. The struggle was brief but visceral, each movement amplifying his dread, the shard slipping from his grasp to clatter uselessly on the stone, its full deafening knell in his ears, echoing the futility of his resistance. The priests bound him to the altar with cords of woven maguey fiber, their coarse texture biting into his skin, grounding him in the physical reality of his impending doom. The cold stone beneath him seeped into his very soul, its unyielding chill a mirror to the god's indifference, leeching away the last vestiges of warmth from his being. As he lay there, the world narrowed to the altar's surface, the symbols beneath him pulsing as if alive, each line a chain binding him to his tragic fate. As the ritual reached its zenith, the priest's chants swelled into a frenzied crescendo, their voices merging with the drums to form a sound that seemed to rend the fabric of reality itself. Shadows gathered round Tlalli, no longer mere absence of light, but entities with purpose, their forms coalescing into a suffocating shroud that whispered of eternal servitude. The horror crested in a wave of unbearable clarity. Not death awaited him, but an undying awareness, a conscious imprisonment within the god's realm, his essence stripped and fed to Huitzilopochtli. Insatiable hunger, while his soul remained tethered to the altar, forever awake in divine bondage. The realization crashed over him like a tidal wave, drowning all hope, leaving only the stark image of his bound form against the altar's cold embrace. A sacrificial offering whose screams would echo silently for eternity, the scene burned itself into an indelible nightmare, Tlalli a solitary figure against the towering pyramid, his body lashed to the stone, eyes wide with the terror of eternal entrapment, surrounded by the flickering blue flames that cast grotesque shadows of priests moving in ritualistic dance. The air vibrated with the weight of his doomed rebellion, the cords cutting into his wrists, a tangible reminder of his powerlessness. While Ixtli's masked silhouette loomed like a vengeful deity, his voice pronouncing Tlalli's fate with cold certainty. The moment crystallized as a haunting tableau, a testament to the god's merciless claim over mortal souls, where defiance only deepened the tragedy. Why of a fate inescapable, pulling Tlalli inexorably toward a void where his essence would linger, forever bound to the altar's unyielding embrace. In the aftermath of the altar's cruel embrace, Tlalli's fate was sealed, etched into the annals of Tenochtitlan's forgotten horrors with a permanence that rivaled the god's own decrees. His physical form lingered, a hollow vessel bound to the world of the living, but his spirit was torn from its mortal moorings, cast adrift into the god's realm, a liminal abyss of endless twilight where time dissolved into a haze of despair. Here, temples floated in a void of starless black, their stone facades crumbling yet eternal, suspended in a dreamscape that mocked the solidity of the world he once knew. The air was devoid of scent, a sterile emptiness that carried only the bone-deep chill of isolation, as if the very essence of life had been stripped away, leaving Tlalli to wander in a sensory void. Fractured memories replayed like cruel mirages. His mother Esther's streaked face at the moment of his selection, the haunting whispers of spectral xochihuas in visions, the cold and yielding stone of the altar pressing against his bound body. Each image flickered and twisted, distorted by the realm's malice, imprinting itself as an indelible scar on his consciousness. A gallery of torments that looped endlessly in the twilight, ensuring he could never escape the weight of his tragic destiny. From this ethereal prison, Tlalli glimpsed the world he had left behind. Fleeting visions piercing the veil like cracks in a shattered mirror. He saw new xochihuas young men with wide, innocent eyes, just as he once had paraded through the palace gates, their steps faltering under the weight of the same false promises of divine honor. The cycle remained unbroken, a relentless machine fueled by the gods' insatiable hunger. Each new selection a mirror of his own descent into oblivion. Tlalli's soul ached with the futility of it all. His internal conflicts now resolved into a singular, crushing regret, a doomed lament for the choices he never had the power to make. Once, he had wrestled with the seductive pull of divine purpose against the primal urge to cling to his humanity. Now, those battles had burned to ash, leaving only a hollow yearning for the life he might have lived. The weaver's son who once wove dreams under starlit skies was gone, replaced by a spectral echo forever tethered to the gods' realm, his regret a palpable weight that suffused the air like a mournful dirge, an eternal reminder of his inescapable fate. Key moments from his journey burned with searing clarity, each a haunting imprint that refused to fade. The chill of his selection lingered, a visceral memory of the priest's cold hands and his mother's silent despair, a whispered plea, "Return to us," echoing like a prophecy unfulfilled. The vision's terror haunted him still, spectral xochihuas with hollow eyes, their silent screams weaving a cacophony that drowned his thoughts. Their warnings of essence harvested for divine greed now proven true. Most vivid of all was the altar's cold grasp, the maguey cords biting into his wrists, the stone's icy surface leaching warmth from his soul's shadows enveloped him, whispering of eternal servitude. These moments crystallized into a gallery of horrors, each image a blade carving deeper into his psyche, ensuring that Tlalli's tragedy would endure as a testament to the gods' merciless claim over mortal lives. His spirit, trapped in this twilight limbo, bore witness to its own annihilation, a conscious prisoner unable to rest, forever replaying the steps that led to his doom. The psychological depth of Tlalli's torment was a labyrinth of shattered hopes and fractured identity. Once torn between duty and rebellion, he now existed in a state of eternal suspension, neither fully human nor divine. His essence a fragmented mosaic of what was and what might have been. The conflict that had defined him, faith in the gods' cosmic order versus the desperate need to preserve his own humanity, had collapsed into a singular truth. There had never been a choice. The gods' will was a noose, tightening with every step, and his defiance, though valiant, had only deepened the tragedy of his inevitable end. Regret not at him, not for resisting, but for believing, even fleetingly, that he could alter the path laid before him. This internal wound bled into the ether, a psychic echo that resonated through the floating temples, a mournful wail that carried the weight of a soul betrayed by both gods and men. The story of Tlalli lingered as a chilling warning, its echoes reverberating through the ruins of Tenochtitlan, where winds howled through crumbled pyramids, carrying the faint, anguished cries of those trapped between worlds. The city, once a vibrant heart of empire, now stood as a silent monument to the gods' insatiable hunger, its stones whispering tales of xochihuas whose essences fueled divine machinations. Tlalli's tragedy endured, not as a mere footnote in history, but as a haunting testament to the cost of divine ambition, a cost paid in the currency of souls. Stripped and bound to altars unseen, the listener was left with an inescapable dread, a visceral unease born of history's hidden shadows, where the line between honor and horror blurred into nothingness. The final image seared itself into the mind, Tlalli, a spectral figure adrift in an endless twilight, his form barely discernible against the floating temples, his eyes hollow yet alive with undying awareness. The void around him pulsed with the whispers of countless others, their voices a chorus of lament that wove through the ether, each note a reminder of the cycle that claimed them, his hands. Once callous from weaving, now reached futilely for a world beyond his grasp, fingers brushing only the cold emptiness of divine bondage. The scene was a haunting tableau, a frozen moment of eternal torment where Tlalli's soul stripped of agency stood as a monument to the gods. Cruelty, a solitary figure lost in a realm where time held no mercy, forever bound to the echoes of a fate he could neither escape nor redeem. As Tlalli's tragic tale fades into the shadows of Tenochtitlan's ruins, we are left with the chilling echoes of history's hidden horror stories that linger like whispers in the wind. If you enjoy uncovering these hidden truths, hit that like button and subscribe for more journeys into the past's darkest corners. Comment below to let me know where you are listening from. I am amazed we are connected across the globe, sharing these haunting tales. Stay curious, and join me next time as we unravel another forgotten story, where the line between honor and horror blurs into eternity.